Jessica Weiner says you've got to have your own style as we talk about body image, self-image on the Rolonda Show. You can call us. You may have questions. You may have an eating disorder. You may want to wonder how to get your own inner style. Call us at 1-877-7-ROW-SHOW. That's 1-877-776-7469. Jessica, how do you find your own inner style?
Gosh, that's a question of the hour, huh?
Yeah.
You know, I think inner style is really about the core components that make you you. And you have to define what's special about you. Do you have a great sense of humor? Do you have fond resiliency? Are you able to bounce back from a bad date or a divorce or, you know, bad job interview? It's really about how you move yourself through the world. It has so much more to do with your personality than it does with your outer appearance. And I think it's just time women get back into balance a little bit. For me, I had to go to inner style once I had gotten through the recovery, because even though you get on the other side of an eating disorder, I'm still a young woman out in the world having to deal with all the same triggers. I just am choosing to not do the behavior anymore.
Absolutely. You said something so powerful before we left, and that is that women so often just give up their power. And what did you mean by that?
I just think that we spend so much time, Rolonda, trying to find our worth in weight, in relationships, even in career status sometimes. And I think what we really have to do is find our worth in being a good human being. And for whatever that means for you, and just feeling peace within yourself. I think so many of us look around and we think, you know, does she like me? Does he think I'm thin? You know, do they think I'm pretty? And in the end, it's like, who cares? You know,
Who
life
cares?
is short.
I know.
It is.
And isn't it amazing how few people really have it all together like that?
Yeah.
There's so many people that depend on outer sources to give them their self-worth.
Yeah, and you know what? If you buy the media hype and you buy into what's sort of being presented for women, then your body and your life will never be perfect, because the whole media industry and the whole diet and health industry is based on selling you something. So you always have to be at a state of imperfection because you need the product.
A state of fear, imperfection, or
and anxiety. You know, you're getting too old. I mean, in this country, you're like, you're too old or you're too young. You're never okay just right where you are. It's
I
like,
know.
So I think it's about us really taking back that power and defining for ourselves, who do we want to be in this life? How are we okay with our bodies? And are we okay with our bodies? And then acting our way out of some of the negative situations.
Jessica Weiner wrote a book, Do I Look Fat in This? And it addresses all of that. She's also on the MaryKateandAshley.com website, where she is a columnist for about 1 million girls in 10 countries.
It's insane. I got to tell you, whether these girls are wearing burqas or Birkenstocks, they have the same questions about their life. You know, whether they live in Sri Lanka or Sacramento, they're asking about boys and, you know, makeup and clothing and who they are in the world. I mean, their questions are deep and rich and universal.
And so many times, like we had mentioned, we follow our mother's footsteps. And, you know, moms are usually on a diet, and that may not be perfect for a young girl. Tell me about the eating disorder that you went through. Was it bulimia? Was it anorexia?
I actually had something that at the time, Rolonda, didn't have a diagnosable term. I was an EDNOS, which is an eating disorder not otherwise specified, which meant I fell in between all three areas of the eating disorders. I had tendencies of anorexia, I had tendencies of bulimia, and I had tendencies for binge eating disorder. What does that mean? That means I was walking around and nobody could tell from looking at me on the outside that I was really dying on the inside, that I was struggling so desperately on the inside.
So there were times you didn't eat anything at all. There were
Correct.
times you threw up what you ate, and there were times you just gorged on food.
Right, exactly. For me, the bulimia part of that was an exercise bulimia. So that was the other tricky thing, was I thought when you went to the gym for 4 hours, you were just disciplined. You know, this is where when you're struggling with the disease, you don't recognize all of its ramifications. I was 14 years old and exercising 4 hours a day.
And that was called chronic
that's exercise
obsession.
bulimia. Yeah, and it is an obsession, but you know what? You can get away with that in a health club because people just look at you, and as long as you're just trying not to gain weight, everybody supports that. And so as a young girl, I got so many mixed messages. So I was using diuretics, laxatives, diet pills. I had all of the warning signs, except for my family and my friends didn't know what warning signs to look for.
Well, what warning signs would you look for?
I think first you have to remember that you can't tell an eating disorder just by looking at somebody's outside. Just because somebody's really emaciated or just because somebody is overweight doesn't mean that they have an eating disorder. So many women, in fact, 25 million women in this country struggle with binge eating disorder and yo-yo dieting, and you would never tell it by looking at them from the outside.
But on the inside, they're totally unhealthy. Their
Yes.
bodies are all
Yes, because their physical size is not necessarily an indicator of health.
That's
so I think
right.
first and foremost, we have to remember that you can't tell an eating disorder by the outside. However, if you've got a child or a best friend or a sister who is constantly talking about food, who isolates herself, who goes through periods of depression, who's very obsessive about food, and who is, what we might call a picky eater, but it starts to impact their life, i.e. they can't go out to restaurants with you, or they don't go out in public, or they only eat alone. I think we have to really look for some of those warning signs. That's not a normal relationship with food, and I think it could be a precursor to something more.
Wow. So what do you tell the young girls? I'm sure that there are things that they may write on the website and you say, uh-oh, here is a case waiting to happen.
Right. Well, I get letters from both girls and moms in the work that I do, and I always find that the language is the same. In the beginning we were talking about the language of fat when women say to each other, do I look fat in this? Or girls will say, ugh, I feel so fat. And I always say to them, fat is not a feeling. Think about it. Fat's
really
not an
isn't.
emotion.
I never quite thought about fat that way.
We always say
That's
I
the
feel
one
fat.
thing it doesn't do.
Right. It's not an emotion.
Right.
And that's the truth is I think sometimes it's the substitute for emotions. So when I deal with girls or women who are asking these questions, I always kind of remind them that they have to build out their emotional repertoire. We have to know how to describe our feelings. When I'm feeling angry with you, I need to be able to identify that. Because if I don't, then it becomes, I'm so ugly, I'm so stupid, I'm so fat. And that keeps us repeating a really negative cycle in our life.
And it's how we talk to ourselves. That's the main thing. You're listening to The Rolonda Show, and we're talking with Jessica Weiner, the author of a book called Do I Look Fat in This? She's also an advice columnist. She's a motivational speaker, and she has her own web address, withjess.com. Having problems with food. Do men have problems with food?
Absolutely. We've got 1 million men in this country who have a diagnosable eating disorder.
Men?
1 million men. And
And that eating disorder is not hot dogs at the game, huh?
No, exactly not. And in fact, no, I think that what's so common now is that men feel like they couldn't come forward with this because it was quote unquote a chicks issue. What are they going to say? I remember speaking at a college once and having an athlete come up to me, a wrestler come up to me in the end. He goes, Jess, I throw up after everything I eat, but I'm not bulimic. And I said, really? Why aren't you bulimic? And he says, well, isn't that what you call it when a girl throws up?
You're kidding.
No, really. He really thought that there was not a term for a guy who had the same disorder.
Wow.
And so I think in the end, men are really in the dark around what to call it, but they absolutely do the same behavior.
Tell them we'll call it bulimio.
Right. We'll give it the male gender form.
We'll give it the male gender form.
But the truth in all this is that eating disorders are a mental health issue. They're not a vanity issue. So that's why men can have it. That's why women can have it. That's why older women, younger women, women of all different races and socioeconomic status, everybody can struggle because it is a legitimate mental health disease.
So is it something that you can just suddenly catch?
No.
It's something you're born with, or something just through your makeup?
Well,
or your influence? Or
they're still studying, actually, the origins of it. As far as a mental health disease goes, we're way behind in our research because there's such a stigma around it. But really, there are a number of factors. Some people do believe it's genetic, just like alcoholism, sort of passed down through the genes. Some of it is certainly environmental. Come on, we live in a world that is so body-obsessed and focused.
So body-obsessed.
And if you have a traumatic experience, a sexual abuse in your life, some sort of trauma, a divorce, those are some of the triggers sometimes that spiral out because people with eating disorders feel like they can control their life by their eating disorder.
How do we get our kids to act right, eat right, and have a good self-image? We'll talk about that as soon as we come back with Jessica Weiner on The Rolonda Show.